I think that the world in the next, I'd say within the next 5 to 10 years, that 9 to 5 is I don't want to say it's completely gone, but I think that this type of work is going to make a huge dent in the job market because people want that flexibility. And I feel like, and I mean, you could probably speak for this too, because, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you being a fractional worker, how much more focused are you than
Mm.
working with one company, but working with like 4 or 5 different companies? Like how rewarding is it to go and spend X amount of hours on one project, clear your brain, take a different approach to another project in that same day, but your productivity, you just feel so much more accomplished. Now, am I right or am I wrong with that? One day you'll leave this world behind, and so live a life you will remember. And that's Tim Bergling, aka Avicii. So this really hits home because it reminds us all that the life is short and we should make the most of it. It's about making sure when we look back, we have plenty of good memories and stories to tell. Because at the end of the day, we all die the same. Nothing really matters after that. It's all about the memories. So it's easy to get caught up in the daily grind and forget to really live life. And that's why it's important to ask ourselves if we're actually doing things that make us happy and fulfilled. Whether it's choosing a job that we love, traveling to new places, or just stepping outside of our comfort zone. Every choice counts towards building a life worth remembering. So, this thought really sets the perfect tone for today's chat because we're diving into different ways of working, like fractional work, and it can open up new paths and experiences that make life truly memorable. So, let's think about how we can live a life that we'll look back on fondly and remember with a big smile on our face. So, welcome back to the Next Day Nomad podcast. As always, I'm your host, Jared Evanishan. And today, I hope you guys are all crushing it at life today. Because actually, I'm still in Vietnam and I absolutely love the decisions that we've made to be here. And my wife and I have decided to actually spend some time away from the big city of Da Nang, even though it's not like a huge city, but we're down in Hoi An, which is a little bit of a smaller town. It's an ancient city that is a UNESCO heritage site that was as of 1999. And so that brings us to our guest today. Today, I have a really exciting guest. I have Michael Gold from Fractional Hub. Michael is a part-time digital nomad and a visionary in the world of fractional work, which is a rapidly growing industry that offers people like you the chance to engage in flexible, impactful roles across various industries. So welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you very much. That was an amazing intro. I don't know how you do that, Jared. That was really what an amazing monologue. But yeah, thank you so much. And I love Hoi An, just to throw that in there.
Oh,
I know
I
you only
know,
just
it's
went like
amazing
a
city.
few days ago, but I think you've visited before, haven't you? But it's so nice. And yeah, I hope you take my tip that I gave you about the Mr. Bean bar because it's definitely worth just a fleeting visit.
Yeah, we're gonna definitely hit that up. And we're currently in 75 hard. We're entering the last 2 weeks in like another 5 days. We're less than 3 weeks finished. So it's a lot of I haven't drank or ate any sweets and been doing 2 workouts, reading, professional development books for the last uh 50, I think it's 57 or 58 days. So we saw the Mr. Bean bar and it looks incredible. There, that whole little area along the river, it seems like it's just. I feel like it little reminds me of like a fake Nashville. I don't know if you've never been to Nashville in
I have
Tennessee, but
not.
it's just like such a cool little vibe. And I recommend Hoi An to everybody because it's there's so much history and beauty there. But yeah, no, I appreciate the kind words as well. It's crazy when you look back on this is episode 41 of the podcast. Um, and I think I'm 9 months in, and it's just been such a fun journey and learned so much. And when I look back on the episodes, they just keep getting better and better and more smooth. And it's true. It kind of, with the theme of today that, you start something hard today and within a year, it's no longer hard. It can
Mm.
be challenging, but it's a lot easier. So, but what I want to do is I really want you to kind of just tell us a little bit about you and what you do. Obviously, like an introduction to fractional work and the company you work for, but also take us on a little bit of a personal journey of like what led you to become a part-time digital nomad, and how has
Mm.
fractional work facilitated this lifestyle for you?
All right. Yeah, there's always so many different ways to answer this without being like trying to get to the point, what's relevant, what's not. But I guess like growing up, I always wanted to travel. That was always a huge factor. And I had this always that internal debate: do I take a gap year? Do I not? I was kind of the person that realized if I took a gap year, I wouldn't go back. So I went to university with this whole plan that I definitely would travel afterwards. And then had a plan with one friend and fell out with them, and so 6 months later didn't. So I then had a wife actually who I ended up getting divorced from, but we thought we were going to travel, and then we actually got to the point where we realized well, she didn't want to travel, and I basically had like 5 years to think, well, we're eventually gonna go, and he just keeps delaying and delaying, and so suddenly I was what was it, 2021, so 4 years ago, so I was 29. So I mean, I nearly hit my 30s after literally that's over a decade of saying I'm going to go traveling, and
Yeah.
never doing it. And then COVID hit, and and I was then with my now fiance, and she had moved in, and we were together for a bit. And in England, at least, we had one Christmas cancelled, and then it was the second year where like they were going to cancel Christmas. They didn't in the end, but that November we basically just got so sick of it that we were just like, if we don't get out now, we might never get out, and just ran basically off to Sri Lanka. And I was just really lucky, I guess, that uh, I was fully prepared to go freelance, and so I quit my job, and I just got very fortunate that that same job brought me back in 3 days a week on a contract. And so this was before I knew what fractional was. I couldn't necessarily, fully define that as fractional, but it was part time. It was working in
Hmm.
a way of project management, which is unstereotypical in terms of being able to manage a full 5 day a week workload across three. So it kind of was fractional. I just didn't have other clients, but the way I was kind of working with them was to an extent like that fractional notion. Did that for 20 months, went around, all of Southeast Asia, Sri Lanka, pretty much following the COVID borders. So we were in Sri Lanka for 3 months, and then as soon as Thailand opened, we kind of popped into Thailand, and then literally waited on the border until Cambodia opened. Then, down in Kampot, taking a bus across the Vietnam border, literally sitting there for days. I remember just in Kampot, kept extending because we kept hearing, they're going to open the border tomorrow or the next day, and no one quite knew. And that's how we pretty much traveled for 20 months. So in the real, almost like the height of COVID, but just about like as it was coming out of that, which was amazing. Amazing way to travel as well. It's a way that we'll never ever get back, because I mean you'll be in Hoi An now and notice obviously amazing, but very full of people everywhere. And so we got to
Hmm.
see Hoi An where like 90% of tourism didn't exist, and so
Oh
it
my
was
goodness.
amazing.
That would
We
have been
went to
something special.
Yeah, I mean, we went to Angkor Wat in Cambodia, one of the biggest sort of things in the world to see, and I think they get 20,000 guests a day, and we saw it at a point where there were 500 guests visiting a day, and I still managed to get annoyed by being in like one of like the areas, and there would be like one other couple next to us, and they would be taking their time going down this alleyway kind of thing, and I'd be like, well, I want to go, and they were annoying me, and I was thinking, that's with 500 people. Like, I'm such a bad traveler when it comes to sharing the space.
That's
Yeah,
incredible.
so did all of that, kind of got to the notion of fractional, and then I mean, you must experience this uh, as a digital nomad. Done it for 20 months and amazing, but started to feel like almost a responsibility to enjoy it. Missed our friends and family, but we kept thinking this is the best thing ever. How can we think like we want to go home? And there's so much divide and stuff. But we eventually went home, wanted to see friends and family, and I very quickly did the thing I thought I wouldn't do, which is I fell back into a 5 day a week job, and was miserable. And I did that
Hmm.
for 9 months or something, got the promotion that if 5 years before I'd got that promotion would have been the best thing in the world, uh, and hated it, and ended up, we bought a house, and a week into having a new mortgage quit. Just I finally got pushed, which I think a lot of freelancers or fractional workers, that type of thing, a lot of people have to get to a point where you just can't hack it anymore, because the actual choice to jump is quite scary. And so I had to get to a
Hmm.
point of really just going, I hate what I'm doing. Uh,
Yeah.
and therefore I need something different. And so I went freelance, still not quite knowing what fractional was. And then about 3 months in, probably started to discover that notion. And for me, it was like a light bulb moment. It was the best concept of working like I've ever come across, I guess. And we can get into like what fractional actually is and stuff. But for me, just like therefore, like the last year, it's been amazing in terms of the clients, the type of work I've done, the flexibility, and all of that. And so now, in a week, we're off to Tbilisi for 7 weeks, going back to the UK, and then like August, we're going to do like a year, 2 years. But I now feel way more prepared. Like last time when we became digital nomads, it was like I had this one lucky contract and it just happened to work. Now I feel like I've actually got like a career that is set up around digital nomadism, or it can be at least.
Yeah. And so like, and that's interesting because yeah, it's like you take advantage of what you can do, and then once you get into that position where you can do it long term, there really is no looking back. But I guess to just back up a bit, maybe like just inform us a little bit more about what fractional work is, because I think like I knew what fractional work was, but I didn't know the term. So maybe just like let the audience know what exactly is fractional work, and yeah, maybe just kind of simplify it a little bit.
Cool. I think to do that, it's worth saying that if you don't know what it is, it's because it's a relatively new coin term, and you can track it for about 5 years back in the US, probably linked to COVID, but I don't definitively know that. But in the US, it's been this thing, and then over like in the UK, Australia, parts of Europe, probably been about a 12-month boom. It's a really new term, and then even then, in the last 2 months, I would say, on top of that boom, it's really starting to ramp up. And there are different definitions. So I would say, when it first came out, or the concept, the real true definition is aimed at C-suite type roles, CEOs, CTOs, CFOs, strategic, because it's a strategic type of role. It's the idea that you could have a CTO or a CFO, these real consultant level or high importance roles, and you can start to do them a fraction of the time. So you can be on a retainer 8 days a week for 2 or 3 different clients. Sorry, 8 days a month. For 2 or 3 different clients, things that would never be able to exist like that. So you could have a startup that wouldn't be able to traditionally afford a CFO, and therefore they would just muddle through, and it wouldn't be great. And now they're able to get like a CFO 1 day a week, someone who's got like a lot of experience, and therefore in that 1 day a week, that 2 day a week, that advice and knowledge and value that they offer is like instrumental to how they can then grow as a company. And it's sort of those type
Hmm.
of resources that weren't available. Obviously, people, and we'll get into that, we'll talk about like certain gig economy roles. People had multiple clients. But the point is, you not at C level. There was never an idea that you could have a part-time CTO for 2 or 3 companies. And so that's where it kind of started. And I now think we're starting to see a trickle down effect of like, so there'll be other roles. Like I'm a project manager, and I think that's one of the best examples of it. Traditionally, if you're a freelancer, you would be working 5 days a week for 3 months, 6 months, a freelancer, a contractor. The idea that you could project manage 2 or 3 hours a day for 3 or 4 different clients, managing multiple projects, like that is an unheard of term. And I think it obviously coincides with the COVID, the remote boom, and therefore like what becomes possible. But I work with 2 or 3 different clients at various levels. So I've got one who's like a really strategic high level client, and I'm doing a lot of consultancy, program level, PMO setup level kind of stuff. But then I have other projects where I'm just running sprints, like just normal everyday projects for some AI companies and stuff like that. And that just wouldn't be possible historically. And so it's tapping into that market. Obviously, if you're like as I said before, like an illustrator, you might have 50 different clients and stuff, but it's a little bit different. And I guess I always just maybe struggle a little bit, but there's an embeddedness to what fractional is. So like an illustrator gig economy, you're this extra sort of supplier. You're not really part of the culture, the company. And as a fractional professional, you should really be thought of as part of the team, part of the roadmap, part of the company, but you just happen to work a day or 2 days a week. And I think that's one of the core definitions. And then there's a new term that I've started to sort of throw around, which is the idea of being fractionally freelance, which is different than fractional. So like I said before, the fractional level is that strategic embeddedness, whereas a fractional freelancer might just be a task doer. So someone who's just come on to do a couple tasks or whatever, but they're working for multiple clients now doing similar low-level tasks. So you might just be a graphic designer who does it for 2 or 3 companies, and it's just like do this graphic. That would be a freelance role, but now you're doing it fractionally freelance because you're working for multiple clients. And then if you're doing it on a strategic, high importance level, more value based, so it's not necessarily about your output and your time. It's about your output, not your time. Then you're working like traditionally fractional. I think that was a bit of a mouthful. I hope it makes sense. It
Oh, it
is
does. Makes
nuanced
total
and
sense.
new. Okay, good.
Yeah, no, I think it's because it's one of those things that I talk about quite a bit and never really knew the term fractional because I mean, I feel like, and I think you and I talked about this when we first spoke, and I know that I've mentioned this many times before on the podcast, is what Reid Hoffman, the co-founder of LinkedIn, said that the gig
Mm,
economy, and he didn't actually specifically say fractional work, but it's very clear that that's what he means, is going to replace the 9 to 5 because companies they'll have AI to do a lot of those tasks that a full-time worker can do. Or you're going to have the startup that doesn't have the funds to pay for somebody full-time. So then they'll hire somebody part-time. I mean, for an example, like my wife was a virtual assistant first. And so she was getting hired by startups or solopreneurs who didn't have the means or the work to give her full-time work. So they'd say, okay, well, I can give you like 5 hours a week and like 20 hours a month. And she had like, I want to say anywhere from 6 to 8 clients at a time. That was giving her anywhere a total of like 30 to 35 hours a week. And each company or each project that she'd work on would be a different type of rate depending on what she was doing. And when she would lose one client, she could then say, "Well, I'm kind of now I'm done with that type of work because I've implemented new skills, and now I'm doing systems that I can now focus on. I can charge more." And so now, obviously, she's now doing project-based work, but I think that the world in the next, I'd say within the next 5 to 10 years, that 9 to 5 is I don't want to say it's completely gone, but I think that this type of work is going to make a huge dent in the job market because people want that flexibility. And I feel like, and I mean, you could probably speak for this too, because and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you being a fractional worker, how much more focused are you than
mm.
working with one company, but working with like 4 or 5 different companies? Like how rewarding is it to go and spend X amount of hours on one project, clear your brain, take a different approach to another project in that same day, but your productivity, you just feel so much more accomplished. Now, am I right or am I wrong with that?
Yeah, so I'd say 100%. I mean, you mentioned Olga, your wife, 8 projects. For me, 3 or 4 clients. But again, it's the nature of the work, I guess. She was a virtual assistant, so
Yeah.
maybe the cognitive load, I don't know, was lower. I would recommend anywhere between 2 and 4 clients, and beyond that, I think it becomes a struggle because it's just the context switching from one to the other.
Yeah.
It can become like incredibly draining. But the concept that you were talking about, 100%. I I feel like I'm not afraid to admit it, and I think people are. And I don't want this to make me sound bad, but after like a year of employment, I tended to switch off, or at least I would find my level. In the first year, you kind of are like overachieving, and then you find your level of like, well, my salary's not really going to go up, or might get raised, like might get like an extra 2 grand
Hmm.
a year. Uh, but where's my coasting level? Because the reality is there's not that much to gain from being at the top anymore. Um, and I think that's why there's stats around. I think psychologically most people do drop off after the first year, if not the second year. And that in terms of learning and growth, there's a lot of stats around the fact that after about 2 years, in most organizations, you've kind of learned everything you're going to learn. And so that's why we tend to see people in a career-based role, like we see people jumping around like every 2 years as the norm. So I think that fixes both of it. So I love the fact that, as I said before, I've got like one client, really high level strategy, embedded transformation,
Hmm.
just massive project, and then the other one is these like really fast agile sprints, AI technology. And so I'm in a stand-up one moment in the morning, and then I'm doing like a report later. And if I was only doing that report, I think I'd lose my mind. But then to be able to then do like quick fixes and bug like fixes with like the QA team and stuff, and go back and forth between that, it's completely changed the way that I work, and yeah, like my motivation and therefore my productivity. And I also think, I mean, and this is probably why salespeople are really good, but like people need a bit of like commission, and it's not quite commission, but people need a little bit of an incentive of like, why are you doing a good job? And people can try to act like really altruistic and say, I do a good job for me. And I get that. But when it's for another company, I mean, there's taking pride in your work, and I get that. At least for me, I know. I want that motivation of being like, if I do a good job, they'll either extend my contract or they'll refer me to someone. I can't afford to be doing bad jobs. I need my jobs to be fantastic. I need everyone to think I'm doing great. And that keeps me motivated, and it increases my productivity. I think it's too easy to just rest on your laurels and coast in a full-time job.
I would agree with that. And I found, I mean, I work in recruitment, so it's different because it's like it's a job, but it's more like running a business through a business, almost like contract work in a lot of ways. Um, but I find that a lot of people nowadays are just burning themselves out because wages are not going up, and they're trying to, they're trying to get those promotions, and they're being overworked. And I just feel like, especially, I don't know, maybe over how it is over there, but I feel like over here, well, sorry, I shouldn't say over here because I'm in Vietnam, but back in North America, I feel like people are really just burnt out. And then there's layoffs, and there's no loyalty anymore, no matter how long you've been at a company. And I feel like people are just really looking for a new style of work. And I feel like this is something that is really going to take off. Now, I and I would agree that, not having eight clients, it's, sometimes you have a client that only gives you like 2 hours a week and stuff like that. And that's where, go looking back on even my wife's projection, she's now doing strictly project-based work, where she only takes on projects, and it's not hourly anymore, it's just project-based. So she can decide on that. And I feel like nowadays you're going to start seeing more of those project-based work, whether it's project management. So like, you could be hired for a specific project. Once that project is done, it's done. And it could be part-time, it could be full-time. But I do feel like that's kind of where that whole area is kind of heading. And I think we're going to see a massive shift in the next, I'd say, 2 to 4 years. I think is a pretty accurate assumption that within that time frame, things are really going to change. Um, but I want to ask you, like, what is what is the job market like now in the UK? Because obviously, I don't do recruitment in the UK, but is it struggling just as much as like North America, or is there some thriving areas? Like, what is the vibe kind of going on right now on kind of in Western Europe?
I mean, yeah, obviously it's hard for me to like give a full review of that. All I can really go off is the idea that if I focus like on LinkedIn, for instance, I know the back end of last year and the beginning of this year, loads of people were posting and complaining about it. They were, statistics weren't particularly great. In the last month or two, again, it might be anecdotal, but my whole sort of LinkedIn feels a lot more positive. People are finding jobs. I've seen more job adverts in general. I've got tons of recruiters on my LinkedIn all posting sort of at least project management roles. And so there does seem to be something good going on, but I guess not to, I think from a baseline of real depression, as in, so
Hmm.
the, good is probably okay, really, where it just looks significantly better than it was. So green shoots kind of on a trajectory of getting better. The fractional market is starting to like really take off. But like I said, there's all the different definitions of what we mean by fractional. And I just want to make that clear in terms of like diluting the strategic like element of it in terms of like the real value based stuff versus fractionally freelance, because we're starting to see that merge into place where people are starting to basically just ask for part-time project managers, which is, as I said, a form of fractional, but there's just a nuanced difference. But for the first time ever, in maybe the last 2-3 weeks, I have actually seen recruiters looking for fractional project managers, fractional product managers. I've just only 2 adverts, one each. But it's the first time I've ever seen that in a job advert. So from that point of view, things are increasing. You've got things like, my own community in terms of the Fractional Hub, but there's plenty of others that are all starting to crop up, and they're all starting to see quite a shift. And so I think it's getting better, is my gut feeling. And I would say, like, as Fractional kind of progresses, it's that whole thing of if you're offering better value, so the individual gets more money, but the company should also be saving more money, and you're finding that balance, that should open more jobs just naturally, because at the moment people are like scared to hire, and I think that's part of the shift that we'll see. If they're scared to hire because they don't want to hire a full-timer because they can't afford all of the benefits and everything that goes along with it, and as AI kind of increases and we all talk about we're going to get the increased efficiencies from this AI, and I think we're yet to fully start to like realize that at companies. As those two things start converging, I think we'll start to see more and more fractional hires, and so the market will start to pick up. And I think we're at the beginning of seeing that.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that too. And um, I think this year started to kind of hit a bit of a bang, in terms of jobs being on the market. Now, keep in mind, I'm obviously speaking for North America, but I will say this, that as the tensions between Canada and the United States continue to develop, I would say that Canada has definitely held on to a little bit more of a standstill in terms of job market, because people are wondering what's going to happen, because our economy is not, I wouldn't say it's very strong at the moment. So I think that would be something that I think people are a little bit hesitant. But one thing I wanted to even just kind of touch base on before I continue that current thought is, with the Fractional Hub, is this a platform where people can learn how to get into fractional work, or what is exactly kind of the process and kind of the direction behind everything?
So we're trying to be a lot of things, and we'll see, I guess, how that goes. At the front of it, the main thing I want it to be is an education piece, because that benefits everyone. So part of it is we've got like a course, for instance, that you could take. It's not the main part of the community, but there's a course, and that's to help people individually like go into fractional. What is fractional? How do I find work being fractional? How do I value price myself? How do I speak to clients about it? How do I educate them? And also, if any company decides to take it, there's sections on like what are the benefits for them or vice versa. And that's like one aspect of it. And then the main part is like this community we're just trying to foster, which is mixed with like people who have been fractional for years or recently versus people who are just considering becoming it. And so it's this nice little network of people who are all just starting to meet each other. I think a really key aspect of it, at least for now, is the idea that if you are fractional and you work somewhere, I didn't want a fractional community where it was like fractional PMs, because there's plenty of them. Like one of the most popular one is an HR specific one, and obviously that's super useful. It's just not what we're sort of doing. I wanted it to be holistic, like across all industries and all sort of job roles, because at least at the moment, if I'm a project manager and I get hired fractionally, that means I know that company are open to the idea of fractional work, and they've already got a PM. It's me. So the idea of me knowing other PMs is less useful. But I would know if they needed a marketing need or an HR need, or they're already open to a fractional PM. So now they'll probably be open to them. And then there's like an actual use of that support network. And I think working as a collective in that sense is way better. And so we're kind of just fostering that at the moment. From next month, we have like a paid community area. So just as an FYI, the community is free and it will stay free in terms of that networking and everything. And then there's like this paid area where we'll be doing events, like masterclasses, which will cover such an array of different things, from clever ways to find jobs on LinkedIn, to how to fire a client is one that I have a guy that I want to do in terms of like when to know that red flags of certain clients just because you're working fractional. Where does that relationship end? How do you manage a difficult person? How to avoid burnout? I've got one digital nomad tax advisor that I know well that I would like to get on. Uh, Maybe not directly linked to fractional work, but for those people who want to explore that kind of thing. And then there's tax issues and stuff and how to maximize that. So it's all of those kind of things, plus like lots of socials, networking opportunities between each other, and just facilitating that. And the last point that we're just introducing, and we'll see where it goes, but ultimately I would want to be a marketplace for these people. So we're going to have, hopefully one day, thousands of fractional professionals, and we will become a dominant market force where companies go, well, we need fractional people. So we'll have an area where fractionals can upload their profiles, sort of saying their rough day rates, what they're into, what profession. And then we'll also have an area where clients can sort of just say, this is what we're looking for. And then we'll provide that kind of matchmaking service.
I think that's a great idea. I think it's an incredible idea in terms of just connecting people with companies and companies with people that because I feel like a lot of people they just like I said, I feel like especially on my side of the world, I haven't heard that term a whole lot running around, but I feel like that this style of work will take off no matter where we are because the work needs to be done. Like I know clients who have a boatload of work to be done, but their budgets are so short and cut that they can't find really top talent because top talent wants full-time jobs. But if they can just, take part-time work and get part-time work and fill in the gaps, I really do think that it would be an attractive piece for, for the right people. And I think that spreading that awareness, I think is incredible. And I think the marketplace aspect is incredible. But how do you how does the pay for fractional workers differ? Like, does it work out to be like better per hour for the worker? Like, I maybe just talk about like the advantages and maybe some of the disadvantages on both sides, the employer and the fractional worker.
Yeah, I mean, so everyone is different, every role is different, and the way you price your contracts is different. So it's really hard. Can't give like a succinct one
Yeah.
line that just sort of wraps it up. But like I tend to work on retainer quite a lot, which I guess for me it allows me not to be time tracked, even though I'm working like 8, 9 days a month, say for one client on a weekly basis. No one's really like monitoring my timesheets, and even on a monthly basis, the retainer is it's a use it or lose it. It's the whole point of a retainer. So whether I actually do 8 days if they ask for 8 days, like it becomes less relevant because they're not asking did I do 8 days? They're asking were we successful in what we set out to do? So even when you're like on a day rate or on a retainer, I feel like working fractionally because you work for multiple clients. So the calendars that you've set up, uh, I work remotely, so I'll be working 2, 3 hours a day for everyone. So I've got calendars that go, oh, I'm with client A at this time, and or I'm just busy at this time, and they don't know whether I'm at the gym, I'm out for lunch, or I'm with another client. Like they just can't kind of see that information. So it stops them micromanaging, which I just think is like to some people like an innate, like it's very difficult not to feel ripped off. So if you have people coming into the office and you're paying them full time or you're paying them for 3 full days and you constantly see them leave at 2 p.m., like that as a human concept is so difficult not to think like feel ripped off, even though ultimately the question should be, are you getting value? So I think working fractionally helps people in that respect. It stops people kind of having to do that kind of micromanaging. So all I'm getting to the point is that you can work on these retainers and you can kind of maximize your value a lot more because you can work. If you're an efficient worker, then you can work more days than you necessarily book in for. And that shouldn't be seen as like any kind of con artistry or anything like that. Because at the end of the day, if you say, I'm going to charge 5 days and then you do it in 4, why do we have like this model in the world where we punish that behavior? Because by punishing the
Yeah.
behavior to be more efficient, you're just telling people will work slower. which
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense. So I think fractional allows you to just kind of focus on value. So that's where the advantage is on the individual. So there is chances to increase your rate, or at least the days that you can fit in, depending on how efficient you are. But also, like I mentioned, a lot of these roles are kind of that strategic, high-level role, and therefore they will naturally have higher rates. And then I also just think there's an economies of scale that I tend to bake in. So if someone hires me 3 days a week, 12 days a month, I will tend to drop my rate slightly than if they only want a day a week. And so
Yeah.
in terms of the contract, if someone hired me for a 6-month contract, 5 days a week, that's going to be like significantly lower my day rate, as opposed to what I can negotiate on 1 day a week. And the advantage to the client is simple. Why are you hiring someone 5 days a week? I mean, it's just such an instinctive, like, well, we have to, that they haven't even questioned whether it is. And I'm not saying no job is 5 days a week and that there's never a time to do that. I'm just saying that now there is a chance to actually analyze that. And if there's a 5 day a week job that you would have hired for that you're now hiring 3 days, then why not save that day in terms of fees for yourself and give a day to the person that you done it for? So as in, like, what I mean by that is allow the person on 3 days to earn 4 days in your mind,
Yeah.
but you were paying 5 days, so let you save it, and then you both win. The person, the contractor, is getting paid slightly higher, and you're saving more for that flexibility. And I just can't see how that's not a win-win for everyone.
I agree. Yeah, like if and that's the thing too, is like you should be rewarded for quick, fast, and efficient work that's quality. Because you're right. You're just if you're kind of being rewarded to work slower if you're not gonna get rewarded for working faster. So it's like you're almost enticing people to just like slow down a little bit. And I see that a lot in government.
Mm.
And government projects more so that the workers, they'll kind of take their time and they clock out at 4:30, 5 o'clock. But then there's the person that is so efficient that they get all their work done in 3 days, but yet they have nothing to do for the next two, and they're almost being told to take time off. And it's like, you know, it's not really fair to the person who's working a lot faster, a lot more efficient. Um, so I think that this is a really nice concept where people can kind of take advantage of that. One of the things I wanted to ask too is what is the cultural impact on fractional work from your personal experience? Like, so now you're integrating into a workforce or a work culture that might have full-time employees, but how does that, transition into like how people view you? I know it's very situational, but in what ways do you think that fractional work could influence like societal norms in the workforce and the company culture?
Hmm. It's a good question. I mean, I'm just trying to think about me and the way like, there's one company I'm doing 3 days a week, and it's at strategic level, and I really don't notice any difference. The way that people see me, I'm like sort of the second to the VP of
Hmm.
transformation, and people completely respect that. I don't feel like I'm an outsider. I feel very much in control. If I tell people to, do something, people do. I really do feel like I'm part of that kind of management team. Um, and in no way does it feel different. And I would say if you're a CTO, CFO, your company culture is set up around that you are saying this is a person who is part of our management team and respect them. And I don't know why that would feel any different. I have had like accusations around the idea of like being accountable. If you're only working a day a week, how embedded are you in that company and stuff? But I feel like that's any CTO, CFO worth their salt is going to be embedded, and the reality is they're going to make it work. We talk about like retainers and stuff, but that's why I sort of talk about the value. Ultimately, if they're booked 4 days a week, but an emergency comes up, I think it would be quite surprising if they didn't tackle that emergency, because they should feel like they're part of the company in the same way that a full-timer would work overtime, without necessarily saying, people just do, sometimes you work late. Um, I think the
Hmm.
CFOs would be looking at that if it was consistently happening every month, to start to reflect on their contract and say, hey, we've got a 4 day a week, a 4 day a month retainer, and this is clearly, you need someone more involved to either hire a full timer or hire me on more days or whatever. And they, you renegotiate contracts and stuff. But I don't think most people would just say, hey, no, you haven't paid me, and then like let your company crumble, because they should be seeing that as like they're fully embedded and part of the team. I do
Hmm.
worry slightly about the whole, as I said, like the fractional freelance aspect, because that is going to be transactional by nature. And there is like the gig economy in there. So I always have to like distinguish between those two things. And I think we will see a lot of more fractional freelancers. But from a fractional point of view, I don't see any issue with the culture and how you're embedded. From a fractionally freelance point of view, it really just depends on like how the company is set up. I mean, it's not too dissimilar, I guess, to having freelancers. You've just now got freelancers who are with you for short times, but also maybe only a couple of days a week, which is probably the abnormal part. But I don't think it really should change much. As a project manager working fractionally freelance, as I have done, I do stand-ups every morning for them. I do weekly reports. And again, I don't see any difference between how I manage them and how I would have managed them if I was full-time. I feel like a lot of that is on, if you're not getting respect or you're not getting what you need, then I think that's more a reflection either of the company itself, not the concept of fractional, or a reflection of you yourself and how comfortable you are working fractionally.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so how does it work when you might hit your 2 days a week or 3 days a week and they need you for more, but you're not available? Is there an option for you to work overtime? And like, is that something that you kind of entertain, or are you pretty set on like work-life balance? Hey, like I'm only here for 3 days a week. Like this is what it is. Um, so how does that work? Again, I know that that's probably a situational question, um, but how do you personally manage that if that situation does arise?
Yeah, so I think it like you said, it's situational, and so much of it is like with burnout is you can manage overtime. It's about how long you can manage overtime for. Like most people can
Yeah.
always do more. It's about how long. And so at the end of the day, if I've got a good contract, a good client relationship that I want to keep in, there's like a little bit of like, we've got a pressing deadline or something. I'm not just going to like log off at 5 p.m. and let the full timers crack on and then see them in 3 days' time and be like, I hope it was okay. Um, so it's a balance of trying to work out how regularly is that happening. How much do you really feel like they've hired you for a day and the scope is clearly 3 days, and then being brave enough to have that sort of negotiation. Like I see myself very much with like my relationships with my clients are really important, but we are on like the same level in a sense. It's not that employer employee kind of relationship. So if you're having issues like that, I think it's just about being transparent, frank, and open, and then coming up with like a solution. And so one of those, I've had contracts where they were 2 days. Like one of the strategic contract I keep referencing, I started off as a non-strategic, so transactional project manager on 2 days a week, and we did it for about 6 weeks, and then realized the scope of the work was significantly more than we thought. I transitioned from that into 3 days a week and doubled my day rate at the same time because of the scope of work, and brought in a subcontractor to backfill my transactional project management role because I was brave enough to have that conversation with them and just say, look, I know we brought me on for 6 weeks. We didn't really know what the lay of the land was. We've done like a 6 week discovery. We started to have a cadence of how we're working together. We're starting to work out how that works. And this is my pitch. Like, I don't think what we're doing right now works long term. So let's have a look at that. I had that conversation. I got the best contract I've ever had. Obviously, other clients will say no, or they might not have just said yes to mine, and there's a negotiation in the middle. But I think the important thing is like, and I had to learn this as well, that the idea of just burning out. I mean, I at one point I was doing 9 days of work in a week. Because that whole fight or flight, like adrenaline of like, I've got to get a new contract, and if I don't get a contract, then I could be unemployed, and so take all the work that's being offered. That will inevitably lead to burnout. And so it's important just to manage that. Just quickly back to your overall point, I think the one point it becomes quite difficult is if, say, you've got 5 clients, 1 day a week each, just for simple maths, and then you are working with one, and it's very clearly they need 2 days from you. That's a scenario that actually hasn't personally yet come up, but as you said, it's completely situational, it's completely independent. And I think at that point, you've acknowledged that you can either do 6 days a week for X amount of time. I mean, how long are the rest of your contracts lasting? How comfortable do you feel? Are there any moments of downtime where you feel like the other ones are actually quite easy and conceptually it's 5 days, but actually you could do it quicker or whatever? Uh, and you just have to manage that yourself. Because if I would take on that 6 day, knowing if it was for like, that that client was gonna keep me for the next 6 months, knowing that one of my other clients only had 3 weeks left to run,
Hmm.
I'm definitely going to want to keep that client no matter what. But the worst case scenario, I would just have to say, look, I can't do the extra day. So you're either going to have to drop my contract because I have these other four valuable clients, or I would look into like subcontracting, which is sort of what I alluded to earlier. And again, that's like an open discussion with your client, and you'll work out how that works for you. But like one of the key stipulations, particularly in the UK, so we've got like a thing, IR35, and that's about being like a disguised employee and the way that you can work with people. And so one of the main rules of that is the idea that one, you have control over how you work, and two, you have the right to a substitution. It's always a funny one because ultimately I can't just like send in a random person to a
Yeah.
company, but I have the right to that substitution. And so if I feel like the work is like difficult or like, I can't fit that in or whatever, you have the right to have that open discussion with them. And I see it as a business, as now I'm a fractional person, and not everyone will. They'll just think of it as like an extension of freelancing. But I really see it as like a true business where I'm offering services. And part of those services are that other people, not just me, can do them, and I will manage them on your behalf. So yeah, I would just look into that.
That's interesting. I think that's really cool. Um, Now, in terms of like um, the like kind of on a global workforce dynamics, do you think that with the rise in fractional work and it's still being in very much like the early stages, how do you see the global workforce adapting? And will we see more like an international collaboration? You know, I know for an example that the UK recruitment companies work heavily in terms of in Dubai. Now, do you see this being something that will kind of transition to hiring people on a global team? Or do you think that it's really just kind of stick to like the Western world, or do you see this kind of really expanding where team companies can hire somebody, from Thailand or the Philippines, and they're going to do fractional work from locations over there? Or do you kind of more so see this happening just in our Western world?
Well, I guess it depends on what you mean, because I know what you mean by Western, but at the same time, just to point out, in like Australia as an example, it's booming.
Yeah.
Uh, and and so I know that's not quite the economies that you're talking about, but it is a worldwide phenomenon in that sense. Um, and then I currently work for US clients, and a lot of those are multinational companies anyway. So as in like it's a US client with a UK office, but they've got Spanish, Dutch offices, like so there's no reason why they wouldn't be hiring people from all around. But then in terms of specifically hiring, and then you start getting into the realms of like outsourcing and potentially cheaper labor. I guess one of the key points to again like reiterate is it really depends on if we're talking about fractionally freelance or fractional. Because if you're talking about like a true sense of fractional and you're talking therefore about really high level expertise, they don't necessarily exist all over, or language is a real instrumental part
Hmm.
of those kind of roles. That's not to say that like a really high level executive, Thai born national, but they obviously could be, and if they had a really good level of English, there's theoretically no reason uh, not to. But that's the same as any kind of gig economy that we live in a global world. I mean, you are Canadian um, living in Da Nang right now. There's no real difference to that. I'm about to be in Tbilisi. I'm about to then next year I'll be in Indonesia or something. Those companies are clearly happy to work with a UK person living in Indonesia. I don't know what the stretch
Yeah.
really would go to having an Indonesian person uh, working. I don't think it's too much different. It's more about the level of quality and the expectations and the cultural stuff, which goes beyond just fractional. That just goes beyond like just general hiring practices, I guess.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Now, if you how does somebody who is listening to this get into fractional work? Maybe they're not working in um maybe they don't have the skill set yet to do this, but like if you were in their shoes at the beginning, someone who's like itching to try to find a way to go remote and live that nomad lifestyle, um, can't really figure out how to get a remote job, what would your suggestion be to them? Maybe they don't have, like I said, not coming from like a project management and they're maybe just kind of doing like your everyday kind of work. How can they start to figure out how to do fractional work and that can maybe make them successful where they can still build an income online and be able to live that life traveling?
So it'd be too easy just to say, go on our website and do the course, wouldn't it? What would I say to them? Again, like I'm saying, I keep saying that I, and I know I might sound like a broken record, but I know that there's other people in the fractional world who will shout at me if I don't get the definitions correct because it is a contentious thing. But if you're sort of, again, like framing that at like the fractional freelancers or the fractionally freelance rather, because if you were at that consultant level, then I think you'd already pretty much have a network of people. And like one of my like top recommendations is if you're in full-time work, the best thing to start, if you want your number one starting point, is go to your full-time employer and ask why you're 5 days a week. Or pitch to them saying like, I could do this job in 3 days. It's a risk, but if you know that you want to go fractional, so you're going to quit anyway, I guess, at some point. I don't know why you wouldn't start in the company that you're already successful at, where you already have the idea that you could do it in less, and pitch them saying, "Hey, I'm going to quit probably, but or can we have like an open discussion around the future of my career and just say like, have you heard of fractional? Educate them, and then start talking about the idea of like, could I do this job 3 days a week, 2 days a week? I don't think you need me here 5 days a week, and this is why, and this is the benefit to you and the benefit to me." If you're talking like fractionally freelance, I think everyone has a skill, and it's about finding that niche. Everyone is able to do something with some experience that they've done, and I can't talk obviously because we're just talking about random made up people who are all going to be so wildly different from each other. But the point is to find something that you can do, uh, and then in terms of finding those opportunities, it's really like nailing down that niche first. I think being on LinkedIn for me personally is a huge thing. Being a thought leader and whatever you've now defined that niche to be, posting a lot, both in terms of like putting your thoughts out there, but also commenting on other people, getting your name out there, becoming someone who like people can see. And then actually probably one of the most interesting ways that I've recently found, because we did this year was a masterclass in the Fractional Hub, our first one, and I thought it was a really intriguing topic, which is go after the full-time jobs. So it's a similar thing I just said before, but I hadn't ever considered it. When someone posts for a marketing role, or we need a new copywriter, or whatever it might be, and it's like a full-time job that they're posting on LinkedIn, message them, pitch. Every job is an opportunity. So you know that company has a pain point because they're hiring. To find out what that pain point is and dissect it and really get in there and go, well, I can do that and do this. Like, I know you probably haven't thought of it, but I can do that for way cheaper than you're asking. It might be a 50 grand job, but I could do that for 30 grand pro rata, like whatever it might be. And so those are a really good place to start, I think. And recruiters might find that frustrating, because I'm literally telling them, go after the recruiter and tell them that they're hiring for the wrong job or the wrong person or whatever. But I think it's an open
Yeah.
education space, and you'll probably have more luck if a company is hiring directly, because I know there's an awkwardness if a recruiter puts out a job advert, they're not necessarily in a position to change the way that we're hiring. But I think a really good recruiter will listen to you, and if they're really advising their client, I think they should still put you up for the role, and they can still earn commission from it in the exact same way. I think they should be listening and going, I know we've all said that this is a 50 grand role, but this person, they sounded great. I spoke to them. They're really qualified and they reckon they can save you money. Yes, your commission might be slightly less, but I think that will service your client. And I think it's the way that everything is shifting. I think if you do that, that client's going to love you and you'll get a lot more work from it. So I don't see too many downsides.
I could definitely agree with that. Yeah, I think if you can find a common ground that everybody wins,
Mm.
and you know the company could get, and they can put that money towards another role that they maybe not had the funds yet to do, and they hire two fractional people in two different areas that somebody's going to come in and they're going to be able to save some money. Um, I definitely see that as a huge bonus. Um, and you mentioned something, and I was actually my next question. So, which is obviously personal branding. So you said thought leader, being a thought leader and posting on LinkedIn. How important do you think it is to be a thought leader and have that personal brand that is going to help you kind of attract those new opportunities? Because I feel like, just to kind of give you some context, I think personal branding, not even just in fractional work, I think personal branding just in everyday work now is something that everybody needs. You need to have something that you can offer. So if we're talking project manager in like a large digital transformation, what value can you bring? Because your word is just saying things in an interview to get you the job. But if you can present yourself with specific knowledge and industry leading information that you're speaking about, whether that's through newsletters, podcasts, but just writing articles, even, how important do you think that is going to be going forward in not only the fractional space, but just the job market itself?
So yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, so one, I'll lay out my stall and say, yeah, it's incredibly important. But I wonder, like, at what point does it not become important? Like, if we keep telling everyone to do it, because my biggest thing at the moment is that
Yeah.
I've read a couple stats. I used to think it was 1% of people that post. I've now heard maybe it's 4%. So even there's a shift. Um, and that 4% is still incredibly low. So you're still putting yourself in this like amazing place. But eventually, when 90% of people on LinkedIn post, let's say,
Yes.
then it will be like a whole like how do you differentiate yourself? And then that's a future that we can worry about then. But for the people listening to this right now, it's the number one differentiator. Since I've gone freelance, I've not shown my CV now in 14 months. I've had numerous clients, and no one's ever asked to look at my CV. My whole CV is like the portfolio, the thought leadership, the way I present myself online. They can see my experience, but honestly, I haven't had any questions. I find it quite mind-boggling to an extent, but I'm almost solely getting hired on personality and then like a belief and a confidence in what I can do, um, which is it baffles me to an extent, but I also get it because at least in the world I'm in, the risk reward is quite low. If I'm rubbish, they can get rid of me fairly easily, and I think that's part of
Yeah.
it. The barrier to entry on that is it's like, do I vibe with you well? Let's get on a call. You sound like you know what you talk about. I've seen you've got a following. I've seen what you've posted about. I see people seem to agree with what you're saying. You sound intelligent. Let's just crack on and go for it. You've given case studies and stuff, and you seem like you know what you're doing. Whereas, like, I don't. What is a CV anyway? Like, historically, it's just a bunch of things I've written on a piece of paper that say I work for this company. Nothing to do with like my performance. I can say anything I want.
Yeah.
I can say, well, I saved them 10 million. Okay, like, did you? Like, it's so meaningless anyway. So you ultimately you put whatever you want on a CV, you get shortlisted, and eventually you end up in an interview room. It's this whole convolutedly long process. No one really knows anything, and then like a week in, you realise that new hire's an asshole anyway. And, like, it's just such a waste of time. So this personal branding, I think, just at least gives you a longer insight into someone's personality. You can go look at the last 12 months of what they've been posting and what and their interests and who they're communicating with and so much more than just like this static CV. And so I think that's just like the way everything is shifting. And then even like you were mentioning, like full timers, end of the day, like people, you leave a job every 2 years on average, 300,000 like tech layoffs, all of those stats that fly around. You never know when you're going to leave. And one of the biggest things I always say about like freelance is it's no less stable than full time anymore. And the way that most people think about that is, and therefore, why not just be freelance? Uh, you know, that it's more stable in one way and less stable in another. But the attention always seems to be focused on, therefore, the freelancer and the advantages for them. And what most people don't think of is, well, if I do want to stay full time, which is an absolute fair decision, it's like they need to also acknowledge that their job is not as stable as they used to think it was. And
Hmm.
therefore, they should be personal branding. Even if they don't think they have a portfolio career, they should be planning for the idea that they are. because careers are getting shorter and shorter. Like I said, that like 30 years in a job when our parents were there, it's now down to 2. It might even be less than 2 on average that people move. And I don't think people go into jobs realizing that actually, on average, in about 18 months, they're going to be looking for another job. And so, therefore, they're just on a very long contract. They're not that much different on average than a freelancer. I might work 3 to 6 months. They work 18 months. Like, it's not that significantly different, and therefore our tactics shouldn't be that significantly different either.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought too, because I think you're right. Actually, I know you're right. People are leaving jobs 18 to 24 months because loyalty doesn't pay anymore. First of all, we're going to get what, a 4% raise every year, maybe every 2 years. But if you move jobs every 2 years, even 3 years, let's say maximum every 3 years, you're getting a new job. It's giving you an opportunity to showcase new skills that you've learned from the current position that you're in, and give you a negotiating tactic to be able to, increase that rate. So maybe you're making, 125,000 USD in job number one. 3 years comes up, it's time to look for another job. You know, 4% isn't really anything. Now you're going and you're maybe getting 150 to $155,000 a year. And I see that a lot of people are using that to climb that salary scale to be able to make more money. Now with remote work, I see people, you know, it's so important that they'll take, not that they'll take a pay cut, but they'll stay the same. They'll get a new job, and it's just a negotiating tactic. It's like, well, if you're not going to let me work remotely, I'm going to go find a remote job that will let me work remotely, because that's important to me, because I'm sick of driving, 2 hours in it, or commuting 2 hours every day for a job that, by the time I get to work, my most optimized hours are lost. Um, Now, when you started like, this is one of the last questions here, because I think it's so important, is when you started your personal branding and you started focusing on what is important for you to get out there, how did you decipher what was important for you to get out there and be a thought leader and use your voice? And how did you determine that this was going to be something that you wanted to be important for you?
I think mine's quite easy and it's unfair and it might not help other people. But I started off in the sense of, obviously, I'm a project manager, and the idea is to show off that I know how to be a project manager. Um, but I very quickly, when I found out what fractional was, and this was before I started the Fractional Hub, but just the concept, and that obviously one thing led to another, uh, I became such a passionate advocate for fractional work that I was banging on about that. I guess within some context, banging on about how, like, therefore project managers within that world could benefit you, but just as a whole, I just wanted to be this fractional advocate, which just made me seem, one, really passionate about something, but fairly knowledgeable, finger on the pulse. And yeah, like I said, as the more the world gets educated, the more opportunities are for me, and I love being in that space specifically, because being the educator is probably the best place you can possibly be in any market. So I'm up against no one. I'm up against people who don't know that the job exists. So, like, if I can convince someone what the notion of fractional is, so if I bang on about fractional enough and people go, what is fractional? I've seen you post on it nonstop, or thank you for introducing me to the concept, blah, blah, blah. I get those jobs. There's no one in competition with me. They just go, I've never heard of it, but you're the only fractional project manager I've heard of. So do you want it? And I take the job. So
That's amazing.
yeah, it was an interesting space. People, I guess, just find out what you're passionate about that is in some way going to help you get a job. Because at the end of the day, you want to be posting consistently. You don't want it to be this disgusting chore. You want to actually be proud of, like, what you're writing and be able to back up what you're writing. But you just need to position yourself as someone of value, and it probably makes sense to do that within something that's going to benefit your career. But at the same time, it's super boring to constantly post about the same thing and being like, this is how you can improve processes in project management, because
Hmm.
you're not like a tutorial manual. You want to be adding more, like, where is the trends of project management going? What's interesting about project
Hmm.
management? How is AI shaping project management? Why is that different to, like, before? And then within that, how are you different than other people? It's a sales guide, but, like, you can't just be salesy all the time.
Yeah. And and that is that's something that I heavily agree with too, because you need to be, and because it is your opinion, and giving your expert advice, and that's kind of like what I was kind of relating to earlier, that just giving, it's a value that you're providing. Like you're providing such a unique value that somebody else is not talking about. And I mean, I know that there's staffing people out there that are talking about how AI is affecting staffing. And there's some really, really talented recruiters out there that have such a huge voice in terms of, negotiating your salary, working remotely, all these things. For me, obviously, I talk a lot about working remotely, staffing industry, whether you're starting a business or getting a remote job. That's my voice. That's what I'm passionate about. And now I find that it's, the more you do it, the more traction you get. Now, the follow up question to this is for somebody who's starting their personal brand, and maybe that's like, hey, light bulb just went off. I need to start posting more and talking about my experience and where things are going in the industry, and start to become that thought leader. How often do you recommend posting? Obviously, it's strategic because you don't want to just post just something for the sake of posting. You want it to be sort of calculated. But when you started out, how did you decipher or decide how often you would post on LinkedIn? And would you do it every day, multiple times a day? And would you kind of create content kind of on a weekly basis? Um, yeah, maybe just like walk us through like what your process is.
Okay, so when I started, it was very much about just trying to do it. So it was once a week, once every other week, no rhythm. Just I felt horrible. And I guess just not the question you asked, but the number one tip I'd give everyone is, and maybe I'm just talking about me, but I think I'm talking about most people. Everyone is sick to their stomach when they start posting. Awful. It's a
Oh yeah.
horrible experience. You're not on your own when you are nervous about doing it. I can't do this. No, this. Everyone thinks that. I hated every post I did until eventually I stopped caring. Like I don't know when that point was, but like there was a moment. But I hated, honestly, every post, and then I'd start to get comments from people, or someone DM me like about how thought they loved my last piece, and I'm like, oh, what a piece of shit that was. Like I was so critical of everything, and it took enough people to sort of say that it was actually decent for me to start like not even necessarily agreeing with them, but just I now don't really care. It's kind of on autopilot, and a part of that autopilot is I use like buffer.com, which I think a lot of people use, scheduling my posts. So I'll spend one evening and I'll do 10 posts, and then it kind of is on autopilot. In terms of how often I post, I read like loads of people, like Justin Welsh is one of the biggest people on LinkedIn, like 700,000 followers, and he's got a course I took. And they all of the gurus say like 2 to 3 times a week is like the thing to do. But then I started actually going on all of the gurus' pages, and they all post daily, which I find really interesting. Every piece of advice online is do 2 to 3 times a week, and then every big person I see seems to do it daily. So it's very conflicting advice. So I eventually moved. I did one day a week, every other week, moved up to 2 to 3 times a week consistently, and then eventually at some point, then I did like 5 days a week, just the work days, and now I do 7 days. I just do every day. I don't. I don't even know what's good or bad or what affects anything. Sometimes I have a post that hits 120,000 impressions, and the next day I've got a post that's 500. Uh, there doesn't seem for me to be any rhyme or consistency with the idea of like, if I post every 3 days, therefore it's better or worse. And maybe I'm terrible at it, but I can't find any logic in the algorithm. And yet I'm doing like 1 million impressions a year, um, which I think is like half decent. It's not fantastic. People are doing like 10 million, 30 million, but it's enough for me. And I don't even therefore even know what the ratio of impressions to warm leads is. Half of the posts that fails are the days that I get DMs, and you can never tell if they got a DM because of the last thing you posted or because of the last 3 months that you posted. Like
Hmm.
people don't say, "Hey, I specifically followed 3 months," or like I specifically it was that post that I'm now DMing you. And I think associating that being like, "Oh, I made this post and someone messaged me," like I think that's not necessarily a good rabbit hole to go down, because I think it might not be true.
Yeah, that's and so like when you started posting, when like obviously consistently, when did you see that first post that got like maybe I don't want to use the word viral, but like when you get like, 125,000 impressions on LinkedIn, like that's impressive. And when you get to that point, like you said, like some might get like 500, some might get 5,000. But how long consistently did you have to post until you got that one that really kind of was seen by a lot of people?
February is when I started posting last year, so 13 months ago. And I think maybe September, October was my first big one. So like 6
Nice.
months.
Yeah.
But again, again,
But
it's
it's consistency.
it's a mixture of consistency, but then it's also like you've got to be careful of like following the numbers for like the wrong reasons. So
Yes,
one
of
of my
course.
things was posting about remote work, right? A hugely contentious topic. Loads of people argued about it. It went really viral. Who cares? Like, there's a part of me that's like, it's amazing I got all those impressions, and yes, my profile went out to loads of
Yeah.
people. What did it actually do for me in that sense? Like, okay, great, loads of people commented on it, and they know that I have a strong stance on remote work, but I'm not, unlike you, in a remote world. Like, I work remotely, but it doesn't like necessarily benefit like my jobs or something. And clients aren't coming to me to be like, that was a great point on remote culture. Let's hire you
Yeah.
as a project manager. So I think I try to balance it with like, let's do an occasional sort of throw that one out there because I want it to kind of go viral because it will help increase like visibility and like grow my profile with like, this is actually quite targeted at like my ideal customer profile. And it's probably only going to get 500 impressions because it's not that interesting to most people, but it's interesting to the people who are going to hire me. And so like having
Yeah.
that balance is really key and not being too critical. Oh, I got 5 likes. And it's like, okay, but like most of the time, my clients don't even like stuff. They will randomly message me and say, I've followed some of your posts, and I would have never heard of them.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just wanted to like reiterate that there'll be people
Yeah.
there who get really down by like what they're seeing in their impressions, and it's more than that.
And I would agree with that too, because it's like you don't need to have a voice where you're hitting that high of impressions or likes or comments or shares. Shares help a lot more because then you're hitting another audience. But what is really important is that if you get, I would much rather have, like for example, on the podcast, some episodes do very well, some don't do well at all. But what does happen is when you get likes, shares, and comments from people, I've now realized that I'm hitting a specific audience. And that is an audience that is actually really interested in my stuff. And I might have people that might come across it, but those aren't really like people that are going to use the information. But when you start seeing the same people commenting and that are enjoying or reaching out, that is what really matters. And I'd much rather have like uh, 1,000 or 500 to 1,000 people of an audience that really value what I say and what my voice is, and that really can take what I'm saying and also from what my guests are saying as well. Than having a post on TikTok go viral because so many people are liking it because there's just that much more people. I would much rather have a small condensed audience than having an audience that's so broad and they don't know how to use your voice and the information that you're providing them, and everyone's looking for that remote job, whereas this is tailored to a specific type of person, and those specific type of people might be a smaller niche, but that smaller niche is actually somebody that's going to find the most value out of it, is my opinion anyway.
Yeah. No, I think it's the same, and it's just so difficult not to get involved in this kind of vanity metrics. I was on a podcast the other day, and it probably got like 500 views. I mean, a lot of these podcasts, like, I don't know what sort of viewership you get. I mean, these are all relatively niche, small. We're not on the Stephen Bartlett like Diary of a CEO where it's going to get
Yeah, of
millions. And
course.
I went on this podcast, and it's almost like, hey, I got 500 views, and I was like a little bit disappointed. I don't know what I was expecting, but it was like 500 views. But about 20 people very specifically signed off the back of that podcast onto the Fractional Hub. And so that kind of buy-in, that means we got like 20% of people that watched the podcast signed up. That's incredible. So again, like, what's the point in getting like 10,000 views in the wrong market? It's more about like
Yeah.
just get the right market and it will grow like how it should grow. So yeah, just
Exactly. And
don't get
that's
too
what's
despondent
really
when people
important.
start talking about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think it's super important to find a way to just hit a really targeted market. And if you're getting, like I said, if you get 100,000 views and but they're not authentic. Not, I shouldn't say the word authentic because that sounds bad. Like your people are buying views. What I mean is like if it's not that's really targeted to your specific audience. Whereas if you get any, you're not maybe hitting that metric, but if you're getting like 500 to 1,000 views, but those are real people that are really really interested. And it's true what they say, like you have to repeat things 7 times for people to actually take action, because it's the subconscious brain that really really kind of comes out. So um that's where it's important to post. And sometimes, like you mentioned, that you're posting sometimes stuff that's like kind of like repetitive, and you kind of sometimes feel like you're being repetitive, but that's where people are really starting to see the value. And that's where they might say that seventh time they see that same message, they're like, yeah, I got to check this out, because like I keep seeing this thing about fractional work or digital nomad work or whatever it is the voice is and whatever the message is. It's time to take action. And it is true that you have to hear that 7 times sometimes before you actually take that action. So
Yeah, yeah. I
but
think in terms of that
yeah, like I
repetitiveness,
think I think
I would ask.
oh no, go ahead. I think there's some lag there. I think there it was a little bit lag. Go ahead, finish your thought there.
Yeah, we just had a bit of lag for the first time. Uh, no, I was just going to say that when people get worried about the repetitiveness or how they post and stuff, I would just ask someone to try to remember what someone else posted. Like, if you're worried about yourself, you'll be so insecure about what you're posting, but just for a moment go, well, what did Lucy post 3 days ago? And the likelihood is you have no idea, and neither does most of the people on your LinkedIn. And that's why, like as you were saying, Jared, you've got to post sometimes the same message. And I don't mean every day do this exact same message. That'd be absurd. But in a cycle of things, don't be afraid to like reuse some content but phrase differently, because you do have to kind of get embedded in someone's psyche, because they're not really acknowledging it. It is a subconscious thing, and over time, that message will eventually seep in. And yeah, I think everyone's insecure and has that spotlight moment. They think everyone must be aware of you at all times, and the reality is there's thousands of people and they're not, and you actually need them to be.
100%. I couldn't agree more. Michael, this has been an incredible conversation. I think that this is really going to help the viewers really understand what fractional work is and how they can use this as an element to, chase that remote or digital nomad lifestyle, to be able to, have that location freedom and even just have time freedom too, freedom in general. So thank you for this. But before we wrap things up, just maybe give the audience, where can we connect with you and how can we connect with you?
Cool. Well, the number one thing I'm obviously advertising in terms of the Fractional Hub, www.thefractionalhub.com, which is very simple. I'm Michael Gold on LinkedIn, and I stupidly changed my URL, and I think it is Fractional Michael, but it might not be. I tried to make it easier for myself, and now I'm forgetting what my own profile is. So hopefully Jared will just put it in some of the show notes or like
Yes,
wherever
of
we put it.
course I will. Yeah, it's
But
fractional
yeah,
Michael Gold. Yeah,
there you
fractional
go,
Michael
Fractional
Gold.
Michael
Yeah.
Gold. I tried to brand myself even there, and forgot because I had some numbers in it before, which was annoying. So yeah,
Yeah, no,
that
I'll
put
put
that
I'll
in
put
two
all the stuff
places.
in the below for you as well.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Jared. It's been good.
Yes, of course. Well, again, like I said, thank you so much for coming on. This has been an incredible conversation. I would actually love to do this again, because I think that there's still so much more to uncover as you kind of scale the fractional hub and kind of things start to kind of roll, because this is a really interesting conversation that I think people need to hear. And hopefully maybe 7 times people will take that action. But yeah, all the information, all the links down below will be there for you to kind of connect with Michael on LinkedIn or the Fractional Hub. And then obviously my links to my social media will be down there below as well. But just everybody, just thank you so much for listening to the podcast, following the podcast, and doing what you do, and like, sharing, and comment. This podcast episodes now are going to be posted every 2 days after the original one posts on our new YouTube channel, the NextDay Nomad. So please check out those if you want to watch the video as well. There's going to be a lot more insights and videos behind the scenes a little bit kind of coming out as I travel around Southeast Asia. So yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Follow us along. Again, the NextDay Nomad or my personal, the Jared Evan. Thank you, everybody. Be brave, be bold, and we'll see you on the road. Cheers.